Hey everybody.
I'm Lex. He's Shane.
Welcome to it. There we go. All right, let's just nail this. Sorry for the
Let's make it worth everyone's while for moving over, huh?
right, no doubt. Okay, so if you're, I don't know, maybe you don't recall when Adobe Reader, when Adobe came out with Document Cloud or DC last year, we had a webcast devoted to pretty much the Adobe customization wizard and creating your own package for not only Acrobat but also Acrobat Reader. Now, obviously, we do offer Adobe Acrobat Reader in the package library. So recommend that you go out and look at that other webcast. There should be a video on our site for it if you want to learn how to use the customization wizard. We're not going to necessarily cover that today. We're just going to talk about, since we've noticed since the new version of DC came out on Tuesday, that we are getting a lot more downloads of those packages, which obviously means people are starting to leave 10 and 11.
Yeah.
So we thought this would be a
Good time to go over it, yeah.
So let's just go ahead and jump on that.
Jump into it, okay.
And while we do that, I'm going to have a whiskey.
So here's our package library, everyone. You'll notice we got DC, DC Classic, and then a couple of patches that go with that. So
I'm just going to do a quick
we're just going to narrow it down
here,
just to those.
See if we can't.
Okay, DC, and there it is. So Shane, what's the difference between DC and DC Classic?
Yeah, and which do you want to use? So you're going to have, and for those of you, this will work for whether you're on Adobe Reader 10 or 11. Number one, if you're on 10, it is officially time to go.
Yeah.
The last update for 10 was in October.
I think you mean 8, right?
No, I mean I don't.
You mean 10? Okay, for the Adobe Reader 10. Sorry. Yep.
Would the people in the cheap seats please keep their voices down?
We're trying to educate some people here.
Sorry.
Oh, don't scare the hell out of all of them. Right?
So,
Anyway, so yeah, if you're on Adobe Reader 10, the last update was in October. For 10, they're done. So 11 is still going to be updated for a little while.
it's time to make the move, guys.
Yep.
Really it is.
But to answer Lex's question on DC and DC 10, number one, I think that this is just me. I think a lot of our customers are probably going to prefer the Classic. There are two branches of Adobe DC, Adobe Reader DC. DC stands for Document Cloud. It's kind of their online offering. There's the DC Continuous. We just call that DC. And then the Classic. The Classic, well, I'm going to show you this. By the way, if you import one of these packages, or any of them, you can see we just grabbed, let's do DC here. I'm going to open up this package we just imported.
Not a lot I can do.
And notice the package properties. I've got a little URL there. Hopefully this, just basically to say this is, follow this URL so that you can see the differences. And that takes you to this page. This explains the differences in what you're looking for. To answer your question, you can see which track should I use. There's the continuous, there's the classic. So I think most people are going to want to use the Classic. Why? If you look down here, number one, the Classic track, especially for Reader, use this if you haven't purchased services from Adobe. You want to manage the updates like previous Adobe 10 or 11 updates, which means you have your quarterly updates. Barring some security issue, you have your quarterly updates. But the quarterly updates are primarily for bug fixes and security, right?
Yeah, and the nice thing is you actually do get to control this update. The other one, not so much.
The continuous, or as we call it, just Adobe Reader DC, that those updates are going to come out more frequently, and there's going to be new features introduced in those. With the old 10 and 11, and in the Classic, new features are kept to major releases. So the quarterly fixes and the emergency ones, those are security. Those are bug fixes in the Classic track. So
personally, I like to let other people figure out the problems with the new
stuff.
features and stuff. So that's why I like the Classic.
However, there's depending on whatever you want to go, whichever one you want to go with. Just so you know, if you go with Adobe Reader DC, the continuous track, which is this one, I'll go back to the package library. So if you go to the one that doesn't say Classic, you're probably going to have more updates that you want to keep on top of. Okay. How are they reported now? You deploy either of these to your systems. It's kind of interesting the way they're reported in inventory. We'll show you that in a moment. Personally, I think Classic is the way that most administrators are going to want to go. It's going to be easier to manage in your environment. However,
Ultimately, it's going to be less work for you, really.
yeah, it's less work, hopefully a little bit more stable
Yeah.
environment. But at the same time, Adobe comes out with a lot of great. I mean, these guys are the ones that defined PDF, and so they're constantly coming up with new services, with new features. If that's something that interests you, go with the continuous. All right.
Got to weigh the pros and cons there, guys.
Yeah. So now we have the patch, and then we have the regular. So let's talk a little bit about that. Number one, I'm gonna kind of focus on the classic.
Okay.
Right? So you can see the classic. You can see those versions 15.006, 30119. If you import this one and deploy it, you can deploy this to even upgrade new systems. It is a bigger. It's bigger in size, okay? Because let's open this guy up. The first thing we do now, we anticipate that this is going to, we anticipate that this is going to be a new install or upgrading from an earlier version. One thing that we do here at step 2, we uninstall a previous Adobe Reader.
Yep.
Why? Because we've seen a lot of our customers that went to the continuous track and then said, yikes, I don't want that, I want the classic track. And normally, a reader upgrades your systems very well. So if you're running Adobe Reader 11 and you just install DC, either track, it's going to upgrade fairly flawlessly. However, if you go to the continuous and then try to move over to the classic will always have a lower version, and that's where you're going to have problems. So anticipating that there's going to be people making the change, step 2, we uninstall an existing reader.
It also makes for a cleaner install overall. So
Oh, it actually does. So you can see that's if you install this.
first thing we do, clean
So
up.
if you push this out to a machine that has an earlier version of Classic, it's still going to get the new version of Classic, but it's just going to take a few extra steps because it's going to uninstall and then reinstall. And then we install Adobe Reader Classic. And this is an older version. This came out, this is their base MUI, which is the multi-language one. This will install the older one, and then as you can see, step 5, we'll patch it to the current version.
Yeah. Now, another way to tell on this again is if you look at that install, 147 megabytes. It's a fairly large package. So.
It is. Now, if you've already got machines that have the Classic, then you can, for those, just download the patch. So here, this is called the Adobe Reader DC patch. It's the Classic track. And this one, we're just going to throw just the patch. Now, this is a cumulative patch. Okay, that's most Adobe patches are cumulative, meaning it will upgrade any version of that major version. So you could have 2 or 3 versions back of Adobe Reader DC Classic, and this will upgrade it fine.
It just has to exist before you
Yes,
get
if
up
you
there.
tried to pushing this out to a machine that had Adobe Reader 11, it would fail because it doesn't. This is not the full install. This is meant to patch existing Classic. So it's a smaller in size. You can see that. And then we do run a few extra steps here. We delete the
Desktop
due to
icons,
this just really popular demand. People say, please remove as much as you can. Try to remove stuff from the desktop. So we do remove the icon from the desktop, and then we do run a couple of registry entries. Add a couple of registry entries to turn off some of the upsell advertising stuff that are.
Nobody wants to see it.
Bundled
I
in
mean,
there.
come on, no one wants to see
In
it.
an enterprise environment, grandma's computer is one thing. An enterprise, this is something that
Time out. You want your grandma to be able to see ads and upgrade stuff?
saying you treat
You're gonna
grandma
be-
differently.
I was going to say, you're going to be getting calls all the time. I won the lottery, Shane. I won an iPad. Why do we have viruses? Oop,
Goodbye,
there we-
grandma.
Yeah, I was going to say. Family tech support. Gotta love it.
So anyway, take a peek at those. Let's do some upgrades. How's that sound? Now, I want to show in now if you're running PDQ inventory. Number one, if you have the Enterprise, if you have a current version of Enterprise, you have the collection library, and that's kept up to date.
Gotta love it. We keep that up to date for you. Make your life simple, simple, simple.
Correct. If you don't, if you have inventory but you don't have the Enterprise, we're going to show you how you can create your own collections to keep track of these. But in the collection library, we'll close the runtimes. We'll go to Applications.
PDF apps.
We'll go to PDF Readers, Adobe Reader. And now you see we've got DC, DC Classic, 11, and 10. So obviously DC, these are the continuous track. You can see the description there. These are the machines that have Adobe Reader DC continuous. And of course you can break that down a little further. These are the ones that have the latest version. You can always see that latest version right there in the description. And then those that have Classic, all right? So I'm gonna open up one computer. Let's do, we'll do Fox. Go to Applications. I'm just going to put a filter here for Reader, make it a little easier to see. So this is Adobe Reader DC, but this is the Classic. Notice it doesn't say Classic there. And then I'm going to open up one of the continuous to show you just kind of
the way it's reported.
Correct. Notice Adobe Acrobat Reader DC. This one happens to not be the MUI. Let's see if we can find one that has the MUI. There it is. So they look the same, minus the version. Notice Adobe Acrobat Reader DC MUI. There's the version. How do we know that this is the continuous? Well, remember I mentioned this URL. It's in the description of whatever package you've got there. You can grab that URL there that explains the difference. And they also explain how they track the versions here. So I'd recommend reading up on that, but I'll give you the short version. The
short version. We already went to the long version.
Right?
Yeah. Okay,
No, we have not gone the long version.
Okay.
Trust me. All right, so if you see, it's going to have 3 parts. 3 parts of the version. If you see on the third part after the second dot, if you see, if the version begins with 3.0, that's Classic. If it begins, however, with 2.0, as you see here, that is continuous. That makes it a little interesting when you're dealing with your collections. So how do you track these? Remember in PDQ inventory we use, in the collection library, we use variables a lot. And variables are something you can use if you have Pro or Enterprise mode, although the collection library is Enterprise only. So let's take a peek at this. I'm going to open up, how do we determine if a machine is DC Classic, the latest version? Open this up and you can see our filters there. And then we are using variables. So we'll make an extra stop over to Preferences so we can read these. But you can see the application has to begin with Adobe Reader DC. I'll show you what that value is. And then the version equals this. If we see that version equals this, we know that's the latest version.
Again, and a way to tell it's a variable is it starts with a $sign.
A $sign is a system.
Oh, that's true. System.
And an at
is a user level.
Or custom.
Custom, yeah.
How do we tell if they have an old one? This is where we have to have an extra filter in there. Here we say it's lower than this version, but they also have to have, if you notice, there's a matches pattern on this one, and that is how we determine if they're Classic or continuous. So if you're using this for, if you're going to build your own collections, you're going to want to do something like this. I'll show you what those are. How do we get there? Number one, if you want to hit Control, comma.
It'll take you right to Preferences.
Or go to File Preferences. We're going to go down to Variables. Perfect. And then we're just going to go, we try to keep a fairly consistent look and feel to this. So anything that begins with app is going to be an application. RT is a runtime. So that would be like your Javas and your Flashes and stuff like that. And then HF is a hotfix. So anyway, we're going to go down to app.
Well, you just went right past it. It's the second one there, man.
Well, app name, there's Adobe Reader DC, but notice there's, in the app ver, if you see app ver, that means that's the version. Perfect. So there's the app ver Adobe DC pattern. That's where we say 15.splat.20 splat. So that means if there's a version of Adobe Reader DC that matches that pattern 2.0, then we know that it is a continuous track. If it's .30 splat, we know it's a Classic. All right. So remember that one. So
again, that's a pattern match on that filter.
If we go, thank you, Lex. So if we come over here, we say application version matches pattern. There's also matches expression. Don't get the two confused. Matches expression expects a regular expression. You could do this in a regular expression, but matches pattern is a little easier because pattern expects wildcards.
Yeah.
Something that we just created. So splat. I want to call that out because those of you that have some users, you shouldn't do this, but welcome to it. Some of you have users that have administrative rights and they install their own software. And you actually have to kind of look for the classic. If you try to go out to Adobe's site and just download the latest reader, it's going to give you the continuous. So you might have computers that have both continuous and classic.
Yeah.
And if you do that, if you're in that kind of a heterogeneous environment, you're going to want to be able to differentiate.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
All right, so let's go ahead. If you guys have any questions, and by the way, Annie, if you want to throw up any of those questions that were sent in previously before we start deploying. Otherwise, I'll just start deploying. All right. Jason, why Reader DC versus Reader 11? It's probably a question for Adobe, but they did post this question, and thank you, by the way, Jason, for submitting that earlier, because Annie said, hey, here's a question, so let's Google it and find out. I went to, this one right here. I just typed in, Adobe Reader DC versus Adobe Reader 11. Came up with this article from Adobe. Why should I upgrade? And this breaks it down. Basically, introducing new features. Depending on whether you want to go continuous or classic, there's a little bit more aggressive patching and new features, introducing of new features. So, also, if your users use, if they have, Adobe, if they need to do stuff on their iPads or their
Mobile devices,
mobile devices, their Android devices or whatever, you're probably going to want to have DC because that's intended to have a common look and feel between the desktop and the mobile apps. So, really, that's a question for, it's up to you. There's new features. Adobe Reader 11, they are not adding new features anymore. They're just doing security and bug fixes. So if Adobe Reader 11 is working for you, you may as well, you may want to keep that.
Roll with it, but eventually,
Yeah, eventually everything's going to go DC, Document Cloud. So I would recommend hitting this one, Jason. Do we have another question? From Rich. We continue to experience performance issues. That's long launch times and application freezes with Adobe Reader versions 10 and 11. And this is in a Windows 7 64-bit environment, running on new hardware and new images and profiles. Do you know if Adobe Reader DC offers improved performance? Don't want to get in trouble here. I don't know.
I'm going to drink to that question.
I don't know. Obviously, from the very first version of Adobe Reader, which was very, very small compared to this huge application now. I haven't heard people saying, "Hey, this solved my problems." I would Google that personally. It is a bigger download.
Yeah.
There's going to be more on the, on your OS.
It'll be a bigger footprint there, definitely, and it's going to take longer to get out to the machine. So
what I would do, Rich, is install this on a couple of machines. Install Adobe Reader DC on a couple of machines that have displayed this problem, and see if you're seeing those same issues at the launch times. I haven't heard anything about it.
I haven't either. So.
And we do use both 11 and DC here in the office. Most of our headquarter machines, in other words, not our lab machines. Most of the folks use 11 still, but we do have a good
smattering of DC.
Smattering of DC. So, do we have any more questions?
All right.
Okay, so what we're going to do is show you a couple of deployments. Pardon me? Oh, okay. Yeah, throw it down.
Larry C. Since deploying Reader DC, a number of users are getting this pop-up. The Acrobat PDF DC browser is missing from the computer. Please download. Interesting.
As a Google school, they save work to the Google Drive, and they use Chrome browser. That's probably it right there, which I try to keep up to date so it appears to be browser related. Yes, Larry, it is.
Yep.
There is the plugin, even for a Document Cloud for browsers, is NPAPI. That's the Netscape plugin, and that's been deprecated. Those of you who need
does not play nice.
Correct. Those of you who use Java and Chrome probably now know that Chrome no longer the later versions of Chrome no longer support Java. It's not just Java, it's anything NPAPI. And that is, so basically what you're going to need to do is, if you absolutely need all those features in your browser, You're going to need to use a browser that either supports NPAPI like Firefox or ActiveX, because they do. Adobe does support ActiveX. That ActiveX is just another way of saying Edge or IE.
Yeah.
So that's what you're going to probably need to do. And then there's add-ons and extensions that you can add to those browsers to work. If you're still having problems with those browsers, then the issue is probably more Adobe related. But yes, if you're using Chrome, now you can open up, because I use the latest Chrome, and I can still open up PDF files within Chrome, but all the interaction, the Chrome, or the old Adobe plugins, that's
No
not going to
longer
work
play
with
nice,
Chrome
yeah.
anymore. So yes, Larry, and I believe that was Larry C. So I think that's Larry out in South Africa. Yes, Larry, that's the issue. I'm sorry. You might have to, if it's imperative, might need to. I hate to say this. You might need to go to IE, buddy. At least for some of these things.
Harsh.
That was a harsh statement there. Wow.
So true.
This is necessary for any IE environment.
That is true.
Good scotch.
Do you want to hit another one, or should we do a deployment?
That's through deployment.
Okay.
I don't. Whatever JJ or Annie wants. I don't care.
Okay.
Okay. So remember, I'm gonna specifically cause an error here. Let me just go to.
You're going to send a patch to a machine that doesn't have it? Excellent.
So let's go. I'm going to look in. Scroll down. I'm going to look in, for Adobe Reader 11. Okay. So Costanza still has that. Adobe Reader 11. I'm just going to hit scan this real quick. Make sure that's. So you see Adobe Reader 11. So if I'm scanning him right now just to make sure we have the latest information. Because remember, the information you see in the inventory is only as good.
That's your last scan,
Thank
which we're doing right now. So,
Yep. Okay. So it's got Adobe Reader 11. So I'm going to deploy this DC patch. I'm going to hit Control D, and we'll just go to Costanza for right now.
once again, for those who just are recent to catching with us, I name all our machines after television shows a lot of us watch. So, Costanza's a machine, not a person. So,
If you're watching this and you don't know who George Costanza is, probably
You're
have
considerably
bigger
younger
problems
than
in
us.
your life.
Vandalay Industries.
It's Vandalay Industries. You need to catch up on Seinfeld. Even if you consider it old people's TV. All right, so notice this error. Move Lex's big dome there.
thanks, man.
Notice you've got MSI error 1642. 1642 is
Just open it up. It'll tell them. Right there.
Yeah.
the program being patched is not installed.
installed.
Yeah, 1642. It just basically means you're trying to upgrade something that doesn't
It's not there.
exist.
Yep.
So if you see that, once again, you're trying to probably push the patch out to a machine that doesn't have an earlier version of Classic. So what are we going to do? We're going to push out Adobe Reader DC Classic, not the patch. We'll choose targets. We'll go to PDQ inventory. All right, and
Let's go up to applications, PDF apps, PDF readers. There we go. Adobe Reader.
so we'll go into it. Anything that has Adobe Reader 11 is going to work. So we'll grab a handful of these, and then we'll go to DC Classic. Remember, this one is the Classic, and old. These are machines that have an older version of Classic. So we'll do like Lagavulin and
Hit Ragnar while you're at it there. There we go.
okay. And because we're doing the non-patch version, let's say that you've got a couple of machines that have the continuous or a later version of Adobe Reader. We'll grab a few of those. Let's piss off Jason and do Jarvis. How's that sound?
Should we put a reboot on it?
Put 4 reboots
Tree
on it.
horn as
Put
well.
4 reboots on it, so it just keeps rebooting. Yeah, that'll be.
So we're
You're
gonna-
evil, JJ. I love it.
We're going to hit deploy right now and watch that go. So obviously we had tried this on the computer Costanza, and now we should see that Costanza is going to work because it's going to stop any version of Adobe Reader that's running. It's going to uninstall it, and then it's going to install the base install. And if you use a package library, that is the MUI. If you're going to use, remember I mentioned earlier on, if you're going to use the Adobe Customization Wizard, which a lot of you probably are going to do, you probably won't have the MUI installed. That means You build your Adobe Reader deployment, customize it for your environment. You can do so much more with the Adobe Customization Wizard. It's a free download. Go do it. Look at our old webcast, that old video giving you instructions.
So you're saying they can roll their own, huh?
This drug reference brought to you by Lex.
Skull.
All right. Yeah. Obviously, we're going to keep on, if you don't know this yet, you can keep an eye on the steps that are being installed.
Very true. Mm-hmm. Well, that's going. Do we got another question?
Yeah, we can throw one up.
Yeah,
Excellent.
go for it.
Doug E. When deploying Adobe Reader DC, does it or will it uninstall the currently installed versions of Reader?
So, by default, yes, it will, unless, as I mentioned, you're trying to deploy the classic DC on top of a machine that has the continuous track of DC. Continuous will always have a later version, and therefore, Adobe says, oh, you're trying to throw an older version on here.
It'll error.
Yeah, we're gonna error out. Now, if you use the package from the package library that we're talking about, the Adobe Reader DC Classic, then we just
We take care of it for you.
we solve that by just uninstalling. But minus that package, if you're just talking about upgrading your existing DCs, your existing 11s or 10s to DC, yes, just the regular installation from Adobe will remove the old version and add the new one.
Yep.
So it's pretty cool, actually. They've done a good job. One thing I love about Adobe Reader is that it's an upgrade in place. Somebody can be running it, so you're going to run the patch. We just had a new patch that came out, obviously, on Tuesday from Adobe. Those users who are using Adobe at that time, their Reader application, not only will they not see what's going on after the upgrade with that same application opened, they can go check the version inside that app, and you're going to see it's the new version. It's pretty slick. Adobe has that part dialed
They've
in.
mastered that pretty well, huh?
The reason we kill Reader here is just because, once again, so many people, we saw this last year, went to DC and then decided to go to Classic.
Yeah.
They didn't want to deal with all the upgrades. They didn't want to deal with, there's a little bit more of an online presence with the continuous track.
And I'm just a big proponent of being mean to your end users, so.
I know you are. All right, so Costanza was successful. A couple others are still moving along.
Chugging along.
And because if you have PDQ, if you're using both deploy and inventory, in preferences, under deployments, you'll notice that we have this scan after, and we've just chosen the standard scan profile. You could also choose applications if you wanted.
That will update your inventory as soon as you've got it.
After a deployment, it will scan. So I can come over here to notice Costanza is no longer in Adobe Reader 11. If I come over to the latest version of DC, Costanza is going to be there. I can open up that computer, Costanza, and we'll see that instead of Adobe Reader 11, we now have DC MUI. Once again, we can tell this is the classic because it begins with 3.0, not 2.0. All right. And let's see, it was, yep. Oh, it looks like Jarvis might be hung on that one, but there was also Treehorn. Treehorn had the Adobe Reader Continuous. And so now if we go look at Treehorn, you'll see that the Continuous no longer exists. It's now the Classic. All right. So you're going to probably want to maintain a couple of different packages. Number one, grab the Adobe Reader DC or DC Classic. Those are going to be for your new installs or your upgrades from earlier versions. And then just deploy the patch to those machines that already have.
Yeah. Save yourself some bandwidth.
Yeah, you may as well. Do we have any more questions? Yeah, pop it up. All right. From Brandon C. We also use Nitro PDF. When pushing out Adobe Reader, can't confirm the patch, but Reader DC, it automatically makes Adobe the default PDF viewer. Is there a way to not change the default reader? Yes, there is. We mentioned the Adobe Customization Wizard.
Yep.
If you use the Customization Wizard, there actually is an option to disable making Adobe Reader the default. However, a lot of that is actually kind of out the window when it comes to your Windows 8 and your Windows 10 desktops because of the way that
Preferred
Windows...
applications, yeah.
Yeah, Windows, I think it was a way, this is just the gospel according to Shane, I think it was a way for Microsoft to try to stem the flow of people leaving IE to other browsers. They've now made your default applications strictly per user, and trying to change automatically register the default fails in so many cases because a user is going to be popped up when there's a new version of Firefox. Even if they've got IE or Chrome as their default, they're going to be presented with, every time that user logs on after a new upgrade, do you want to use your current IE or Chrome or whatever? Do you want to use that as the default, or do you want to change it to Firefox? So it's all per user. So you're probably still, your users on those platforms, Brandon, are probably still going to have some nagging questions, but use the Adobe Customization Wizard. Once again, go out to our Annie, you might want to find that link to that video and post it on the chat forum there. If you just Google Adobe Customization Wizard DC, yeah, there you go. You can just go there, download that, run it on your machine, and then there's some instructions. Look at our. I mean, we really nail it down in that other webcast on how you can do this. But this is a very popular way for people to not just change the default, but customize any Adobe product that is supported by the wizard. Customize that for their environment. Maybe you want to disable using browsers and Adobe, or maybe you need to enable tighter restrictions, etc. So. Yeah. Look at the customization wizard. That'll nail your question. In case any of you are getting ready to ask, hey, Shane, Lex, why don't you guys just build something in the Adobe Customization Wizard and then make that available in the package library? And the answer is, when you
What options do you want?
Yeah, well, it's that, but there's also the legal part. If you look at the EULA, the End User License Agreement for the Customization Wizard, you are making you're customizing whatever Adobe product for your organization, not for multiple organizations. So, because all of our customers are obviously from thousands and thousands of organizations around the world, we use the regular offline installers from Adobe, but that also leaves us limited in the changes that we can make.
Yeah.
So. If you have any questions, recommend highly, if you're using PDQ inventory, the enterprise mode with the collection library is fantastic because we stay on top of this stuff. That way you can always see,
the latest and greatest.
Correct. You could, for example, come over to the package library, go to Adobe Reader DC Patch Classic, for example, and say add auto deployment if you have the enterprise mode. So now we're looking just at Adobe Reader, the patch. That was the patch, right?
That was the patch.
Yeah. So we're going to add an auto deployment, create a schedule, and we'll say, Reader DC, whatever, classic patch.
And just have this run once a week, maybe?
Or whatever. It depends on you.
Yeah.
If you want to run it daily, feel free to run it daily. You could also, if you have inventory, use the heartbeat, and that means when inventory sees that a computer goes from offline to online, it'll trigger this install. And your targets, you would then say,
Link to
inventory.
Or as you want to do a link to is a dynamic collection. So as new things move in and out,
Yep.
they'll be referred to there.
If you don't use link to, you have to specify the targets, the actual computers that you want. Here we're going to link to, and we're just going to say, every day run the upgrade against computers in
Reader DC Classic with an older version.
This way you're patching only those that have an existing version of DC Classic, so you're not going to get those 1642 errors. So you say OK to that. That means, and then your options, I'm going to say stop deploying to computers once they succeed, etc. You say OK to that. And then by default, it's going to keep if you notice down here, remove us. If you look at the approval, that means automatically after 7 days. That's the default. If you go to your preferences under package library, you can see that in auto deployment, basically the default is 7 days. That means 7 days after a new version of this package has been in the package library, it will then be, that will now, after 7 days, if you don't manually approve it, that will be the new version that you're going to be deploying in this schedule. So if you want to change that, for your default, you can change it in preferences. If you want to change that just for this particular instance, I can say change it. Nah, I want to go immediately. That doesn't mean it will deploy it immediately. That just means that once your console
hits that schedule,
once it sees that there's a new version of Adobe of this package, it's going to make that new version the default. And the next time the schedule runs, you're going to get those. So I've got this set to run every day as well as on a heartbeat. Guess what? Set it and forget it. I might read, hey, there was a new Adobe Reader patch. Let's go check it out. Let's go see if my computers have it. Chances are they're going to have it. They're going to have the latest version because you've already set this up. So there you go.
Yeah. JG says we got one more question. When I install Adobe Reader DC Classic package from PDQ Deploy, it uninstalls Adobe Reader DC Classic. How can I avoid this? Did I read that right?
Yeah, you did. So
Bob
that's
S.
because you were installing, hi Bob. That's because you are installing the DC Classic, not the patch, on top of, so you want, this does have the latest version. Remember, it uninstalls, step 2 uninstalls Adobe Reader. Step 3 installs the first release, the main package, the main installer for Adobe Reader. And then step 5 patches that to the current level. So if you're going to be patching existing DC Classic, use the patch package.
Yeah.
All right. And if you want to build your own, then build your own and just remove step 2.
So that you right click and disable that.
Yeah, or you could right click and disable. So that's how you do that. By the way, disabling won't work on auto deployment. Auto deployment takes the packages as they currently are. However, coming up in PDQ Deploy 8. You can do some customizations with your auto deployment packages by having steps run before and after. You can't disable, but you can run before and after actions. Just so you know. Heads up, Deploy 8 going into beta probably next week.
Yeah, it's amazing, guys.
Yep, rock on. And I guess that's everything.
Yeah.
Sorry for getting a late start. But, yeah, what can you say?
Okay.
For those of you who are watching this, not on the live stream, you're going, "Oh, what does that mean?" I just grabbed this video. Anyway, keep on this channel. We're going to be doing this every Thursday, and barring Lex having another kidney stone.
Of it, yeah.
Only one? Yeah. There we go. Nothing will stop me from coming in and talk to you guys. So
Yeah, rock on, you guys.
have a good one.
We'll see you.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining today, and thanks for all the really great questions. If your question was featured, if you'll please email me at webcast@adminarsenal.com so I can get in touch with you, see if we can hook you up with some swag. If you had a question that you didn't get answered and you still like an answer to it, we're always here for you, support.adminarsenal.com. You can check us out there, and we'll see you guys next Thursday.